Hey everybody, it's RJ, your host, and welcome to Hash It Out. In this episode, I'll be speaking with Jacqueline McGrane of Boulder Creek Technologies about what the forefront of cannabis extraction technology looks like. We'll also dive into the important discussion of cannabis production's environmental impacts, how cannabis companies can mitigate their carbon footprint, how federal cannabis legalization in the US can address cannabis production's climate change effects, and more. Without further ado, let's hash it out. My guest today is the Senior Vice President of Business Development at the cannabis equipment company Boulder Creek Technologies. Welcome to the show, Jacqueline McGrane. Hello, how are you today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me on Hash It Out. I really appreciate being here. So looking forward to chatting.
I'm stoked. I'm stoked to talk to you about all that you've got going on over at Boulder Creek Technologies and then going into some of the wider cannabis topics that the people out there are talking about. But first and foremost, where are you joining us virtually from today?
So I'm joining you from our CEO's office, actually, in Arvada, Colorado. So right near Denver.
Okay, right on. I've got some family out near Denver. They just recently moved from what is it? Boulder, from Boulder. So yeah, cool. Love to see that. Well, hey, thank you so much again for sitting down and having a conversation with me today. Very grateful for you taking the time. Diving right in here and asking you about a little more about yourself and then, of course, what you've got going on over at Boulder Creek Technologies. I understand here that you are a professional hash maker and also a biologist who trained at MIT and the University of Colorado Boulder. So first and foremost, I mean, what an accomplishment, right? Like, could you have ever imagined that you would, in this day and age or in your lifetime be able to specialize in a craft such as that?
You know, it's so funny that you asked that. So when I was at MIT, my major was biology, and so I was doing biomedical research.
Sure.
Specifically, I did a fellowship at the Mayo Clinic at their Comprehensive Cancer Center doing research on breast cancer. And then I did a fellowship up at the Harris Center for Eating Disorders at Mass General Hospital and Harvard Medical School. And so prior to getting into the cannabis industry, I was very much focused on, biomedical academia as like my future. And, but I grew up in Colorado. I've smoked cannabis since I was about like 12 years old. So, I really have always loved the plant. And I realized that, there was an opportunity in the cannabis industries for people that were educated in, biology, chemistry, engineering, and those kinds of training. And so, but at the time in 2011, I knew it was basically academic suicide, right? Like if I was going to join the cannabis space, I was never going to get a job in biomedical, academia again. But I did it because I thought that there was a good opportunity to focus on one of my big passions, which is promoting nutraceutical medicine. And so, but nowadays, a decade later, you see on the back of buses. I just saw the other day on the back of a bus a degree program in cannabis, business, a degree program in cannabis processing. All these different things that colleges are getting into and universities, and so now it's a widely accepted path for biomedical researchers to go into, which I just think is such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, we've certainly come such a long way when it comes to the academic legitimacy of cannabis processing, of cannabis research on both the medicinal and the recreational side. So that is awesome that you found yourself at such a forefront of such a burgeoning like academic pursuit. And then diving in here into what Boulder Creek Technologies is doing, I understand Boulder Creek Technologies is based in Colorado and provides scalable, solventless extraction solutions to the cannabis industry. The company recently unveiled its vapor static extraction system, which is meant to be a new way of thinking about sustainable, scalable, efficient, and environmentally friendly cannabis processing solutions. So tell me more about this vapor static extraction system and how it exactly is more environmentally friendly than other processing methods.
Sure, no problem. So this technology is really exciting, and so like I talked about, I've been in the industry for a decade now, doing all sorts of stuff all over the country and internationally. A lot of like build outs, design services, consulting, equipment design, And throughout the last 10 years, I've never been as excited about a technology as I am about vapor static. So, vapor static, in its essence, is using hot air as the extraction medium. And, instead of a solvent or heat and pressure based methodology, it's just using literal air that's all around us heating up, right? Now, that's something that people have done for a long time, right? The volcano back in the 1990s, early 2000s, that is a hot air vaporizer. And it vaporizes cannabinoids into that little bag, and then you suck it all out, right?
Yeah.
Get high. But what the difficulty has been over the last 20 years, because there's been multiple companies that have attempted to develop a technology based off of hot air extraction of cannabinoids and terps. The problem has always been not the vaporization, but rather the condensation of those cannabinoids and terpenes back into a liquid. The issue is, and if you've ever used a volcano, you see this directly, right? Is that when cannabinoids and terpenes are vaporized, they form what's called a non coalescing vapor. And basically, it's very, very difficult to take a non coalescing vapor and bring it back to a liquid. So, for the last 20 years, companies have tried all sorts of stuff to accomplish this, right? And most of it has been derivatives of the same kind of things we would see on like an FFE or rotary evaporator or a distillation system, trying to just directly cool that vapor and turn it back into a liquid. And it's just impossible to do that. You just cannot efficiently recover them. So what Boulder Creek Technologies has done, we have created we have applied what's called electrostatic precipitation to the problem, and we've been able to solve it extremely efficiently and effectively. So essentially what electrostatic precipitation is we're using an electromagnetic field to pull the particles out of the vapor stream and cause them to essentially hit the sidewalls of our collection core and turn back into a liquid. So what this allows is it allows extremely efficient cannabinoid and terpene extraction from biomass material. So we have done a lot of analytics and comparisons to currently existing methodologies, and we've determined that the vapor static tech allows an 80% reduction of operating expenditures, as well as a 60% reduction in capital expenditures required to actually house the equipment. So, in terms of like environmental safety and sustainability, solventless is going to be a huge aspect of that, right? We use so much solvent in this industry, and a lot of it is lost within the processing, and it has a very large carbon footprint. Not only that, but it requires a huge amount of infrastructure and power and electricity to house safely these methodologies, right? C1D1, C1D2 infrastructure, huge HVAC systems, gigantic air conditioners, and all that has a big, big carbon footprint. So with vapor static, because we're not dealing with solvents and we're not dealing with high pressures, we can build a piece of equipment that extracts cannabinoids at scale and does so in a way that it could be housed in a Quonset hut next to a farm and be safe and compliant, and does so without producing any negative side effects for the environment, such as the loss of solvent and the massive use of electricity. Like I mentioned, we use an electromagnetic field to pull the particles out of the vapor stream. However, we're using a very high voltage at a very low amperage. So when you compare the power use of our system to entire lines of other methodologies, you just see such a massive reduction in carbon footprint.
Wow, that's so interesting, and that's such a great pursuit. And we'll get into this a little bit later because the environmental impact of and the carbon footprint impact of cannabis production is certainly something that I don't think we need to shy away from as a discussion, although it hasn't really been a focus in the cannabis industry discussion, at least so far, because we're still dealing with just legalizing the damn thing. I believe, Boulder Creek Technologies unveiled this technology at MJ BizCon 2021. Is that right?
That's correct. So
Yeah.
last fall. So BCT's been around for about over 2.5 years, and so we really worked to get our system and our technology up and ready to go and tested, and then we released it at MJ BizCon, and it was just a smashing success. I've been to pretty much every MJ BizCon since I think it was at the Rio, and
Yeah.
I've never seen such interest in a booth as there was in the BCT booth. So it was great. It was a great
Wow.
experience.
Yeah, I mean, if you can maximize the efficiency of the processing while also lowering your carbon footprint, I mean, I don't that there's a win-win for everybody. I would guess, I would assume. Now, moving in here to the conversation of uh, the environmental impact of cannabis processing. Just for a little background knowledge for our viewers and listeners here, the recreational use of cannabis is legalized currently in 18 U.S. states, the District of Columbia, the Northern Mariana Islands, and Guam, while medical cannabis is legal in 36 states. Most of the industry focus, as I just mentioned, on cannabis's human health effects and the tax revenue it generates. While the discussion of its environmental impacts, the environmental impacts of the cannabis industry, rather, are largely ignored or haven't really been talked about as much, at least as of now. In Colorado, the state's cannabis industry accounts for 1.3% of its overall yearly carbon emissions, according to the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. This is similar to the emissions from coal mining and trash collection for the entire state. Now, as you mentioned, the lights used to grow cannabis indoors uses a lot of electricity, and producers often pump carbon dioxide indoors to increase the rate of photosynthesis and plant growth, which alone can account for 11 to 25% of a facility's greenhouse gas emissions. Now, in my view, there's sort of an irony in the fact that the mass production and the processing of a plant from the earth is contributing directly to the climate change of said earth. So, with that being said, in your view, how can a balance sort of be struck between meeting the demand of the cannabis market, which has only been rising, while not contributing as much to climate change, which everyone is saying, of course, is one of the greatest threats to our humanity?
Right. And so, we see in cannabis like such a beautiful thing, right? And we're all passionate in the industry about promoting this nutraceutical medicine, about changing how people think about their health, right?
Yeah.
And so, obviously, we would want to do that in a way that is both sustainable and environmentally friendly. However, it's very difficult to strike a balance, and one of the biggest things is legalization, right? Everybody is forced to grow, like for example in Colorado, although I will say we make the best cannabis, is
I would agree.
not a great place to grow cannabis, right? I mean, right now there's a foot of snow outside of my window. And so, that's forced people to grow indoors, right? And anytime you're growing a plant inside of a building with an artificial sun, that's going to create a huge carbon footprint. And just like you said, injection of carbon dioxide, especially to deal with the higher elevations here and to increase photosynthesis, the huge amount of power that lighting takes up, even LED lighting comparatively to just using the sun. Now, obviously, we're kind of stuck right now because in the state of Colorado, we can't go to California and go buy, cannabis that was grown outdoors, right? And use that. So federal legalization is going to really help with that in opening up the market to allowing the best areas to grow sustainably and efficiently cannabis to provide that cannabis to the rest of the nation. So that's going to be a huge thing. But in the meantime, while we all wait for the bureaucracy of government to hurry up and get with the times,
Right.
there's a lot of things that we can do, to help create a more sustainable product. And when it comes to growing, it's kind of difficult, right? You're especially in a state like Colorado, but when it comes to processing, there are a lot of opportunities. And so, right now we use, for example, let's just talk about a CO2 method extraction methodology to an end product, right? So you have a CO2 extractor, which is using a huge amount of electricity and power to compress, at thousands of psi, then carbon dioxide gas, which a significant amount of that is released to the atmosphere later on, and into a liquid, which is then used to extract the cannabinoids. However, you end up with a output oil that has significant wax fats and lipids, sometimes sugar, and so you need to clean that up. And so then you're using an ethanol based solvent, or 180 proof or 190 proof ethanol and a winterization process that requires chillers and cryo coolers and freezers and filters that are, you're going to either clean or dispose of. And then you have to recover that solvent using an FFE or a rotary evaporator, which again takes a significant amount of power. And then you got to devol it in a reactor, and then you can run it through distillation, and then you can homogenize it, and then you can make a final product, which is a vape pen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just to get from the plant to just a simple product like a vape pen, there's so many steps, and each of those steps requires a person, and each of those people is doing it in a batch-based methodology. I think one of the most biggest ways and inefficiency in this market is from batch-based processing. If we look at any other industrial process, commodity processing, it's not batch-based, it's continuous, right? You're continuously processing in an automated system run by as few amount of people as possible using the most efficient processing possible. In cannabis, we have a person filling up a bag, with 30 pounds of cannabis material, putting it in a CO2 extractor, then doing it over and over and over again, and that just creates a lot of first of all cost, right? Which we always want to reduce cost to create more accessibility, but it also is very negative to overall carbon footprint of these processing facilities. So I think it's very important to move away from batch-based methodologies and towards continuous processing methodologies. And it's also important to try to reduce the amount of individual steps to go from the biomass to an end product, and do so in a way that's automated and allows the least amount of use of labor. And so doing those things together is going to make a huge difference to how much of a carbon footprint the processing side of the industry has.
That's such a good point that you bring up, sort of just streamlining the entire process. And maybe there are ways in which the efficiency of the processing can be improved. However, one of the biggest steps, and perhaps the biggest steps, is federal cannabis policy reform. We can't really, in a lot of ways, people's hands are tied until it's legal to do all of the things that people want to do with processing cannabis and getting the accessibility out to the people who need it. So speaking of which, diving into then the federal cannabis policy reform discussion. Again, this is this is based off of industry data from the U.S. Department of Energy and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. They say that growing cannabis indoors leads to higher greenhouse gas emissions in the Mountain West, the Midwest, and Alaska compared to and Hawaii compared to the Pacific and Atlantic coast in the U.S., which you had mentioned. Colorado has some of the best cannabis out there, but you have to grow it all indoors because you have a foot of snow you're dealing with outside. Researchers with the Colorado State University say that the U.S. cannabis industry is projected to grow by roughly 16% every year, but the industry is so new that they don't really know how much of it will be or is being grown indoors. Additionally, every indoor operation is unique. As you mentioned, some are using older warehouses with maybe more outdated equipment or technology, whereas others are a lot more energy efficient and up to date. The researchers suggested that federal cannabis legalization could allow lawmakers and manufacturers to cultivate cannabis in regions in the country that are greener and cheaper, which you also mentioned. So what are your thoughts on that? And then how do you think we can ensure that environmentally friendly practices are prioritized if and when federal cannabis legalization happens in the U.S.? There's now currently like a handful of bills, some from Democrats, some from lawmakers, that are aiming for this federal cannabis policy reform. But how can we make sure that environmentally friendly practices are prioritized?
See, I think that's a really important thing to think about. We so often think about federal legalization as just being necessary to increase accessibility, right, and efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
But you also got to think about what kind of regulatory framework cannabis is going to exist in after federal legalization happens. And I think a lot of people like just don't think about that too much because they're, we're just working to get that first step, right,
Right.
of federal legalization. But what comes after that? And what comes after that, in my mind, is a regulatory framework that promotes not only safe cannabis growing and processing and product testing, but also does and promotes efficient from a sustainability perspective. So when you look at like the EPA and how they work with like other industries, right? Generally, what they'll do is they'll designate what's called like a best available technology, and that best available, what's called a BAT designation. And a BAT designation would go towards a piece of equipment that is generally recognized as being the best, most efficient, safe, and sustainable piece of equipment for whatever particular task is occurring.
Mm.
So my hope is that, after federal legalization, we start to see the EPA coming in and creating a regulatory framework to say, hey, we're looking at these technologies. We say LEDs, for indoor growing, if you are going to still do that, is the best available technology. It's efficient, and sustainable, right? So when you have a BAT designation, a lot of times it pretty much forces operators to use it. So, that can create higher costs initially, but down the line, it's going to create a much better industry overall. So, in terms of processing, that's one of our big hopes at BCT is to be able to achieve a best available technology designation on the extraction component. And, I think the EPA is going to be very much involved. If they came in today and they saw the industry, what they would see is, just a lot of issues with not only efficiency, but also safety and sustainability. And they're going to want to do something about that. Now, right now, they really don't. It's all up to individual state regulatory agencies, which all act differently in this big factionalized thing that we have today. But in the end, they're going to want to promote something that is not, that is different, I think, from what we see today. So that's what I hope happens. First of all, I hope federal legalization happens sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Right now you see a lot of states struggling. It's like California, for example, with the massive overproduction of cannabis material. If there was an ability to send that out of state, that would vastly solve their issues, right?
Right.
And, Oregon, same kind of thing. In the future, I think almost all cannabis material is going to be grown in California, Oregon, and then the southeast region, the Atlantic coast. Because that's where it's the most efficient to grow, and you can grow outdoors extremely effectively. And so, in the end, I think that's where most cannabis production is going to take place. The other thing is reducing the number of facilities, processing facilities, right? You look at these individual states, and they have all these little itty bitty processing facilities dotted around warehouses, that are running 100 pounds of cannabis material a day,
Yeah.
right? And as much as I love, like connoisseur product, and there will always be a place for connoisseur product in the future, there really needs to be a consolidation of initial processing at the very least into regional production facilities. So how I kind of view after federal legalization is I kind of see a lot of these, processing facilities essentially being moved closer to where the cannabis production is going to be, and into large regional processors that are located in California, Oregon, and then the Atlantic coast. And then, obviously there'll be a bunch of smaller ones. It's going to be like the alcohol industry, where there's like the Anheuser-Busch and the Coors and like these giant facilities.
Yeah.
And then there's going to be, your Stone and your little micro brews. And that'll be, focused on that super connoisseur product. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I think that's the future of the industry and where we're headed.
Certainly. I agree with you. I think there's a place for the commercial production of cannabis as well as the craft production of cannabis. Very similar, like you said, to the brewery, the beer industry, which completely makes sense considering, cannabis and hops are, so closely related. So with all that being said, then, I certainly hope, I agree with you, I hope that federal legalization happens sooner rather than later. It's such an exciting time to be in cannabis, especially for someone like yourself, who is, of course, the professional hash maker, who has all of this academic background in cannabis and is seeing now all of these like course programs at universities specifically for cannabis. Such an amazing time to be on the forefront of this. So with that being said, Boulder Creek Technologies has just come off of the unveiling of the vapor static extraction system at MJ BizCon. What are y'all looking forward to for the rest of the course of this year, 2022? Can't believe we're already here, but here we are. And looking forward into the years to come. What are y'all working on? What have you got in the works that you can share with me, of course?
Oh, no, no worries. So actually, so right now our main focus is getting our production units out there and building our 4 different sizes of the vapor static technology. So 100 pounds a day, 400 pounds a day, 1,000 pounds a day, and 5,000 pounds a day. In fact, something really cool is we have our 5,000 pound a day production system actually in operation right now with a client in Oregon, which is awesome. Gathering lots of data and making a lot of beautiful oil out there. So for the rest of the year, that's going to be our main focus, is getting the vapor static technology in the hands of the operators that need it, and doing so in a way that's fast and efficient. So that's our main focus. In terms of technology development, there's so much more that we're looking at to expand upon the vapor static tech. And so basically, looking to take it so that you could actually use a wet biomass material and then output basically a distillate, right? So right now, what our system does is it takes dried ground material and outputs what we call vapor static concentrate, which is very high quality concentrate material that's ready to distill. What we want to do is expand upon that and actually use the same extraction component. We use what's called a flash tube dryer system to actually extract the cannabinoids. It's pretty cool. So essentially, what's happening is that air is being pulled through a series of tubes, and those tubes are the air is heated, and the tubes are in an oven, right? And as the biomass is sucked into the tubes, it literally spends a fraction of a second being exposed to heat. But during that fraction of a second, the cannabinoids are vaporized and decarboxylated, and the terpenes are vaporized. And so it's a really efficient way to do the initial extraction component. But you could also use that same kind of flash tube dryer system to take wet biomass material and dry it into the dried material that would be ready for the second stage. So essentially, you could use like a 2-stage flash tube dryer. And another cool thing is that you could actually use that initial stage to do what essentially would be like a steam distillation while you're removing the water, right? You're flash vaporizing the water, that's creating steam. That could remove a lot of the terpenes, which then you could pull off even before the secondary extraction component and do separations, before distillation, which would be pretty sweet. And then finally, just taking that oil, which is continuously being pumped out of the system, and just pump it straight into a thin film. That's something that we can do right now and that we are doing, but we want to develop a more advanced thin film technology to allow us to really take that concentrate and output super high quality distillate right out of the machine. And then eventually what that'll turn into are in the next few years is one operator in a fully automated continuous process taking wet biomass material on one side and outputting distillate ready to be homogenized with terps and put into products.
Wow, that just all sounds so fascinating. Like I would love, the next time I'm in Colorado to visit and just see this process, because just envisioning it in my mind, it sounds so fascinating. So that must be so exciting for you to be able to be on that forefront.
Oh man, it's something, like I said, over the last 10 years I've seen a lot of technologies, a lot of cool technologies, and this is by far the most excited I've ever been. And just to see the state of the industry today and this anticipation, this everyone getting ready, you could feel the energy. Like I remember back in like 2011, like the 2 years before Amendment 64 in Colorado came down the line.
Yeah.
And I just remember you could feel this like palpable excitement as people were like, it's going to happen. Colorado's going to legalize cannabis. It's going to change everything. And it was like it was an energy that you could feel, right? As a scientist, of course, it's kind of hard for me to talk about that, but like
feel that.
it was true,
Yeah.
and I feel that same kind of energy today. And so, being not only developing a technology that I think will revolutionize the space, and we all, the team at BCT believes in so passionately, but also doing so at a time when we're getting so close to, this final step that people have been working towards since in the 1930s.
Sure.
It's just such an exciting time to be part of the industry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, we will certainly be keeping an eye on all that y'all have got going on over at BCT. Please keep up the good work, and would love to have you back for a Rehash It Out the next time you've got something cool coming down the pipeline. Feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for taking the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, if you're ever in Colorado, feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be more than happy to do a demo for you.
Oh, yes. I will hold you to that. Yes, indeed. Yeah, I don't get out there nearly as much, but yeah, the next time that I am out there in the Denver area, I will look y'all up for sure. Perfect. Yeah. Well, hey, thank you so much again for taking the time to share your perspective. Such an enlightening conversation. And please keep up the good work. I'm wishing you nothing but health and peace and safety out there in this wild world. Thank you so much.
You as well. And thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation. I hope you have a wonderful day.
You got it. Yeah, you too. Jacqueline McGrane, everybody. That is it for Hash It Out, y'all. Thank y'all so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. I'm your host, RJ Balde, and I will catch y'all in the next one. Peace out. Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking out our channel. Click here to watch another episode of Hash It Out. To find more cannabis industry reporting, insider stories, and to stay up to date on the latest trends, make sure to subscribe and keep up with our Trichomes community app. Download it now for free, and we'll see you there.